Hello and welcome to episode 25 of Series 4 of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. This is the show for employee engagers and internal communicators who like to keep up to date with all that is new in our profession. My name's Craig Smith from The Big Picture People. Well, after today, we've got 2 more episodes left for this series of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast, Series 4. On the 5th of December, I have an interview with Casey Wall. Casey is from Attuned, and he's going to be telling us all about how we can better understand employee motivations, and in particular, intrinsic motivation, the things that not necessarily our organisation does for us, but the motivation that we get from the work that we do itself. So that's an interview that, as I say, we've got going out on the 5th of December. And then on the 19th of December, we have an interview with Helen Neal. Helen is from HN Communications, and Helen is going to be telling us all about how we can better engage our employees using sustainability that is going on within our business. So whether it's environmental or sustainability from a broader perspective, how important that is to our employees, and how we as internal communicators and employee engagers need to understand that and be able to relate to our employees' expectations. So that's going to take us up to the end of Series 4. And then going into Series 5, I'm just going to whet your appetite with a few really interesting interviews that we've got lined up for the new year and for the new series. We're going to be talking to a retired spy. We're going to be talking to someone who worked in counterintelligence for a number of years and is now applying the lessons from that to the world of leadership and communication. So really interesting conversation that's coming up in the first couple of months of next year in the new season. We've also going to be speaking to someone who's going to be telling us all about the importance of social purpose and how they're using social purpose within their organization. Really fascinating interview. We're going to be finding about how you can make your internal comms effective when you only have a team of one or a small team of internal communicators. I'm sure that resonates with a lot of you. And even if you have a big team, I know a lot of internal communicators have to bootstrap a lot. They have to use their wit and their influence to get things done. They don't always have the resources that some of our other colleagues are fortunate enough to have. And we're also going to be looking at workplace culture and how we can create a positive workplace culture. So we've got some fantastic interviews already lined up for the beginning of the new year, some very diverse topics as we like to try and do. So hopefully you're going to be looking forward to that, and we're going to follow straight on into the new year. Our first episode actually goes out on the 2nd of January, but I'll tell you more about that in the final 2 episodes that we've got coming up in the next few weeks. So that's enough of me. Let's move into this episode's interview. In this episode, we're going to visit a topic that we've looked at before, and that's psychological safety. Lots of organisations are aware of psychological safety, are talking about psychological safety at the moment, but not necessarily sure what it is or how to develop or build a culture of psychological safety. So we're going to be looking at it from a number of different angles, and we're going to be talking to an expert in the field who built up his career initially in the mergers and acquisitions industry, and he built up there a knowledge of organisational culture and what worked and what didn't when it came to successfully integrating organizations together. So our interviewee is going to share with us a number of aspects when it comes to psychological safety, and 3 aspects in particular. That is how that we give our employees a voice within the organization, how that they feel that they can grow, and how that we embrace diversity and inclusion and belonging to ensure that they can bring their full selves to work. And we've got some very interesting metrics that we're going to be discovering later on in terms of the return on investment for building a psychological safety within your organization. And that includes increasing discretionary effort, including performance and productivity, increasing the amount of problem solving and innovation within the organization, and increasing retention and reducing turnover. So we're going to look at the actual tangible benefits of having a culture of psychological safety within your organization. So that's what we're going to be looking at. And at the end of the episode as well, our guest will share with you some links to some of the elements that he talks about, some of the data that he talks about in the interview. So if you're looking for some sources for that data as well, if you look in the show notes at the end of the interview, the version of the interview on our website at engagingic.com, you'll find a link there to a blog that the guest has written, which will give you all of the information and data that he refers to in this interview. So I hope you find this enlightening and useful. My guest today is Maurice Ducoing. Maurice acts as a guide for companies large and small, using his 15 years of experience in human capital, business strategy, branding, talent management, and organizational transformation. He helps these businesses to realize the power of their potential, of their executives, their managers, and their employees. His business, Ducoing Human Capital, is a consultancy specializing in a variety of human capital management solutions grounded in psychological safety, including employee experience, change management, and communications. So, hello, Maurice. How are you?
I'm great, Craig. Thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here. I'm doing well.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's great to speak to you. So just for our listeners, whereabouts in the world are you? Where are you positioned at the moment?
For those listening, I'm actually a New Yorker that's living in Los Angeles. I've been here almost 10 years at this point, but once a New Yorker, always a New Yorker. So I say that because people will sort of get that sense from me if they know New Yorkers.
Fantastic. Yes, definitely. That's definitely. So yeah, you've moved a diagonal across the United States then from home to where your new home is. So
weather.
And what's the weather like where you are? Those Brits always like to talk about the weather. What's the weather doing where you are at the moment?
There's a very peculiar weather pattern for Brits here. It's called the sun. And I seem to be getting solar power at every moment. So it's actually very nice. We're about a nice 70 degrees. That's pretty much what it is all the time. But we had a kind of strange summer. So we're now heading into what I hope is going to be a more stable period.
Yeah. We're having a bit of a heat wave here at the moment, which is it's quite unusual for us. So I was down in London yesterday, and it was absolutely it's put it into Fahrenheit, about 90 Fahrenheit. So it was very, very warm. Yeah, quite unpleasant. But not London wasn't unpleasant, but just the weather was. So yeah, excellent. So, Maurice, tell us a little bit about your story, because I know when we had our initial conversation, it was an interesting route to where you are now, and some not a conventional route to doing what you're doing now. So, tell the listeners a little bit about your backstory, please.
Definitely not conventional. And I'll just add one item. You'd mentioned employee experience, change management, psychological safety. I'll just throw inclusion in there as well. And I think that'll become really obvious as we start talking a little bit more. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility are big in my thinking, even if it's not necessarily always in doing. But as you pointed out, I had kind of an unorthodox growth into human capital consulting. I actually started as a middle school teacher. I did the New York City Teaching Fellows program, and I taught middle school, got my master's through the program in education curriculum design, taught in the Bronx, crazy time. That's a whole other podcast, quite frankly. But I did that for a number of years. And then I actually somehow moved over and got a job in Deloitte Consulting. And that's where really I grew up, I'd say, in the human capital consulting space. So I was there out of their New York practice in human capital. And I focused a lot in change management. My first project was the Thomson Reuters integration. If you've heard of that one before.
Yeah.
I basically focused in learning strategy as well as change management. But then I left in about 2014 and I started working in private equity. And I think it's really funny because when you work in employee experience, when you work in change management, all these things that are people centric, you don't necessarily, the reputations of private equity sometimes precede themselves, is a right way of saying it. And I spent a lot of time really working there in trying to build that up. I said I wouldn't be involved in it unless I built that up and was really able to focus on that. So I actually spent a lot of time there building their end-to-end human capital best practices. That's from hiring all the way to separations. So all the different things that you do in between there. I also worked on about 100 integrations. So they were merging. It's a major element of the private equity thesis to kind of merge companies together and get inorganic growth. And then actually I left and I spent the last 3 years working as an operator, actually in a software company where I really focused on a number of things, but really overall helping them to scale, go from
Yeah.
150 to 200 employees to about 1,000, and about 15 or 17 integrations during that time, which is a 2.5 year period is pretty wild. But I guess the theme of all of my work is focusing on, employing the right approach, I guess, to help employees feel right, feel safe, feel appreciated, and feel developed. I think those are really important. And
Yeah.
maybe a second element, which is a laboratory.
Yeah.
Because of a lot of the companies that I've worked with, at least in the last 6, 7, 8 years, have been B2B software companies of a certain kind, mission critical, all of that. I've really sort of worked as in a laboratory where I've been able to sort of test the same practices with very similar companies and sort of control. And that's given me a different perspective on how these best practices work and how the people element changes those dynamics every day.
Okay. So yeah, so your background in is in sort of private equity and mergers and acquisitions, and it sounds like you've been involved in some fairly substantial mergers and acquisitions there. And as you say, a key part of that is integrating the two organizations together, whether one is more one is the acquirer, and one is the one that's being merged. There's an integration process on there. I know when we spoke initially, we talked about you talked about it, and I think it resonated with me. Is there's sort of inclination to undervalue the importance of culture and the people that we are. I use this term loosely because it sounds wrong, but we're acquiring these human resources, these people, when one of these companies are being bought, and they're obviously human beings with their own personalities and personal aspirations, but there's often that gets ignored at the expense of all the kind of stuff that's more tangible. Is that your experience, and why do you think, if so, or why do you think organizations tend to not sort of kind of realize the importance of that when it comes to valuing or doing their due diligence when they're acquiring another company?
Well, in fairness to the private equity companies that have talked to me and worked with me, at least initially, they
Mm-hmm.
did say they were looking for culture. They were saying that this was a differentiator for them, and that's sort of what they brought me in for. Although I will say that it was funny during my interview, they asked, "What do you
Mm-hmm.
think of private equity?" And I said, "I don't." For the exact reason that you just brought up, which is,
Yeah.
this is, oil and water here. But
Mm.
I will say that most private equity firms are getting smart on this area, and they understand that the people element is not only a differentiator, but there's so many levers there you have to pull that make mergers successful, that make the actual operations of the company successful, that if you don't pay attention to that, or you just try and ram things through, or you just make the experience really poor, then no one's going to want to stay there. And
Mm.
so, I think when I first got there, a lot of things were about just recruiting. Everyone understood recruiting, right?
Mm.
Maybe they understood development, and they definitely understood you had to lay people off, right? Those were like the existent compliance elements that we had. Changing recruiting into an experiential thing, and inclusive experience was some of the things that I added there, and they were open to that. I also did strange things like brought in change champion networks.
Yeah.
They had very much focused on a lot of the Patrick Lencioni initiated work, and
Mm.
I love Patrick Lencioni. I think that his work in the field was exemplary, and he really got a lot of those types of people to think twice about culture. I think he's really the main reason responsible. And
Yeah.
as a result of that, people really allowed others of us to come in afterwards and take it to the next level, because he was
Mm.
very, fable like. He told stories about it. He had good examples to go by, but they were story like. But when we came in, I really focused on what were the metrics, what were the measures, how do you actually measure these? And I really landed on two key things. One, a set of 4 measures: employee experience, performance, productivity, innovation and problem solving, and then retention, I think, were how we scientifically got them to understand the levers to pull. And then psychological safety. I I was designing and delivering a rising executive annual class, and so that was part of the class there. It has now become the major core element of my practice. It infuses everything. It may be a new concept to a lot of people, but it's actually as old as human beings are, if you really look into it. So
Yeah.
I just, it gave me those entryways that I'm really grateful for.
Yeah. Well, that's a really nice segue into what I wanted to talk to you about next, because that's that kind of the whole kind of title of the interview, and what we're going to be talking about is psychological safety. And we've covered this before on the show, and it always intrigues me. And I think there are many and multiple and valid definitions of psychological safety. But I'm interested in your definition of psychological safety, Maurice, and then we can maybe go on to talk about go into that in more detail, and the ROI of psychological safety. We can start off with a definition of what it actually means, and what your definition of psychological safety is, please, Maurice.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that there's a general definition, and I'll do a permutation of that. So typically, psychological safety is a team or group of people who feel safe, take interpersonal risks, to make mistakes, and that it's the furtherance of the goals of the group. It's really important that they're actually doing this not just to make mistakes because they're lazy, but because they're actually trying to produce better, right? They're trying to perform better. And the reason that they can do that is because they're not distracted by fear. So that's the definition that I think people can relate to. That's the Edmondson definition. Simon Sinek added that psychological safety is very influenced by people managers. Google did that as well. Daniel Coyle really focused on, and something I think that these audiences will be interested in, the interpersonal communications cues and dynamics. That's what he focused on in terms of psychological safety. He didn't actually call it that; he called it trust. And Simon does the same thing, but they're really talking about psychological safety. Raddick and Hull talk about a safety model. Helbig and Norman really relate their practices to the what do I do day to day. And so I think there's a lot of different people who add their own element. What I would add is 3 pieces. We are delivering a social need. People are able to perform better because 3 of their social needs are being met. The need to have a voice, which is to speak and speak up. It's the need to have growth, which is a focus on understanding failure and mistakes as being a logical, fundamental process and not something to be ashamed of, as well as the curiosity to seek out new opportunities. And then the one that I really don't think anyone is talking about, or at least not enough people are making the connection, it's to that diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility piece, which is what I'll call the full self for our sake. And that really focuses on 2 elements: strengths, and that's skill strengths, like we think about, but also character strengths, like virtues. Like those are distinct for each person. And then their intersectional identity. Being a Black woman from a place, or being a gay Latino male, all of these things, all of these different elements change your experience and your contributions. And so I think it's really important to acknowledge that as part of being safe. Because if those aren't acknowledged, if those aren't valued, I don't really feel safe. So that's what I would add.
Yeah, no, that's great, and I think it's good. It's good, and I like your definition, and I guess some of the definitions I've heard are, well, I think they're all very similar and they overlap, and there's a lot of commonality. And you gave us some kind of textbook, and I think it's that ability to be able to lean into what is a very uncertain future that many organizations, if not all, face at the moment, with some sense of, I'm going to be okay because someone's got my back, and I can experiment and make mistakes and potentially fail, as long as my goal is to further myself or to further the organization, and the genuine honest mistakes. It's when you live in that sort of sense of you're going to get kind of jumped on as soon as you step over any lines, even if you're doing it because you're trying to further the organization and the way you serve your customers or your end users. So yeah.
100%.
Um, yeah. So let's maybe go through those in a little bit more detail, because I think you that's a nice, those three things you talked about: voice, growth, and that whole DEI and the sense of belonging and bringing your full self to work. Can we go through them in turn, Maurice? So starting
Sure.
with voice, let's maybe go into that a little bit more detail, perhaps.
Absolutely. And let me know also what more detail you think would be good here, because I
Yeah.
could
Yeah.
talk all day and we want to edit it as well. But
Yeah.
I'd say
Yeah.
voice, I mentioned speak and speak up, right?
Yeah.
That really officially and structurally, tried to take this language actually from Professor Clark, who actually focused on the terms contribution and
Mm,
challenge. So if you think
mm,
about it, it's people contributing new ideas, people contributing additive ideas, because I do believe that is a distinctive skill and a distinctive experience for somebody to add
mm,
ideas onto someone else, to actually listen to them and say, hey, I hear you, and I think that is a distinctive experience to something original. And
yeah.
then I think there's also the challenge piece. And this is the scary one, right? Because you're in an environment where you're, one, challenging processes. So you're speaking up, that doesn't work, or this is actually worse than it was before, things like that.
Mm,
But then there's
mm,
the speaking up element, which is say, there's been some injustice. We are paying women less in this organization. We are doing X, even when it doesn't directly impact you as well
mm,
as when it does. That kind of speaking up is very dangerous for people, or at least they perceive it as that way. And so
mm,
when I think about voice, these are very real experiences that people have. And whenever there's an obstacle, an inhibition, that means it's not quite as safe. And as a result, that inhibition is going to be on their mind, and it's going to
mm,
take them away. It's going to push them away from the appropriate behavior about speaking ideas. What is
mm,
my idea that is going to completely revolutionize the way we do hoteling, like Airbnb?
mm,
Those ideas were uh, laughed out of their particular rooms the first time, right?
mm,
But not everyone who's going to come up with ideas is going to be strong enough to push it forward on their own. And how
mm.
many ideas die on the vine because they're not in the environment to really support them? And so that's why voice is essential for the organization and essential for um, uh, the individual experience and the team
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah, it's
Um,
interesting. Just to explore that a little bit more with you,
yeah,
Morris,
sure.
because it's a really interesting one, in that I totally agree with you. You've been able to that whole creativity piece and being able to kind of challenge and ask questions, and I guess some people listening will think, well, actually, that's all well and good, a lot, but some of my people actually, they use their voice to sometimes derail or sidetrack or potentially sabotage other people's ideas, and where we're so democratic and everybody has so much of a voice that actually it goes full circle, and actually we never get anything done because all we just do is debate. How to organize, because I think that's I totally agree that's a really important part of psychological safety. How do organizations strike that balance without tipping into feeling unsafe or helping people feel or making people unsafe, because the use of voice is used as a sort of it's almost constraining other people's voices. Do you see what I mean? Because I see that quite a lot. What in some of the work that I do is that actually there's a fear of voice, because it's actually seen that, well, if we give everybody a voice, it's going to mean we never get anything done because we're just talking all the time. Have you got a way of maybe reconciling that, or kind of getting that balance right?
Yeah, it's a great question and a great problem that we're always tackling every day, right? Because
Yeah.
everyone approaches the psychological safety problem with different characters, right?
Mm.
And not every organization has the person who, if you let them, they will talk until everyone's dead. They'll
Hmm.
just keep
Yeah.
going on and on. They have no sense of that.
Mm.
And that, to me, I usually handle through coaching, right?
Yeah.
We have to target individuals who are, they turn their liberty into license, right? They've now
Mm.
abused what that is. But what I would say is it's hard to say that two things are happening in that circumstance. One,
Mm.
it's hard to say that just because there are a few people who do that, that we should not have people being able to voice their opinions, all the good that
Mm.
that comes because of the few. I think that may be an extreme response as well. So we do have to find balance. But the second I'd say is it may be difficult for us to actually recognize when someone is just constantly talking and they are bringing back good faith, very important elements, because either leadership or the rest of the organization is not quite there yet. There are a lot of practices that we engage in organizationally that probably still have bias and still have prejudice. Just think about a referral program, for example. The referral program, by definition, is a biased program because it actually wants you to get people who are just like you, right? And that advantages people who are already incumbent. And if people speak up about it and nothing happens, is that speaking up about it? People go, oh, come on, not this again. The referral program, it's an essential component. Or the resume, the name on the resume, does that really? Yes, it does. These have influence. And so if people are constantly speaking up in those areas, I think organizations have a difficult time telling the difference between somebody who's saying things to say them and trying to add value and honestly trying to achieve justice.
Yeah, that's a great answer. No, I mean, I agree with you. I've done some good work with some really good developmental facilitators who when people are contributing, it's always useful to get them, if they've got that level of self-awareness and emotional intelligence themselves, to reflect on, what is your motivation behind the point that you're making. If it's purely self-interest or to kind of further your own ego or status, then is that the right thing? Is that the right way to use your voice? But if it's actually in furtherance of the organization and something that we all collectively care about, then that's the kind of construct and people who can use questioning really well, not in a way that you kind of saying people feel scared then to say anything, but actually just reflect on what they're saying and why they're saying it, and then maybe alter the way what they're going to say in order to get the outcome that they're looking for. I think that can be, a really great way to shape that into away from just we want to kind of talk this out or kind of find a way of just
that's a great point. Yeah,
filling the room with words.
I definitely agree with that. Even ego can sometimes be right, like the broken clock, two times a day, right? It still directionally be the right thing, even if it's coming from a different intent.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, Maurice, so if we can move on to the second one then. So the growth.
I knew it would happen, right? It's the interesting stuff to really break into.
Absolutely, yeah. So growth.
Communication makes sense. So growth.
Absolutely, yeah.
This is actually a really hard one because people oversimplify it. And I think actually to the detriment of a lot of our leaders, a lot of executives that I worked with, when I say things like, we have to be willing to accept mistakes, we have to be willing to accept failure, immediately it's, okay, but one, we can't fail in front of the client. Or two, what do you mean by mistakes? What if somebody's just making these stupid mistakes? They don't really think about it. And as a result, it costs the organization a lot of money.
Yeah.
Of course, we want to prevent those. But in each of those instances, I would say that you still need to completely change your frame, or you're just going to make people fearful about something they can't change. So even if you go around telling everybody you can't make mistakes in front of a client, the surefire way of getting them to make a mistake in front of a client, tell them don't make a mistake in front of the client. They're going to get nervous and they're going to bungle it, right? What you do is you say, you got this, you can make it happen, and actually coach and support them. And that's how you get there. And the mistake and failure element, Amy Edmondson actually just wrote a new book on it, but basically it's three different pieces. One, it's, the preventable failure. Okay, that's the failure that everybody knows and hates, which is a mistake that I made because of carelessness or any number of things. Well, think about it for just a moment. And I just wrote a blog post on something like this just the other day. But basically, think about it as the mistake. Instead of saying, oh, how do we find this person in blame or in fault? Instead of having that frame, why not say, why did the mistake happen in the first place? Yes, maybe there was a degree of carelessness. That's fine. And we can address that. But why was that person making this mistake in the first place? Why have we not automated it? Why was it somebody this junior making the mistake? all right, because the other person just didn't want to, even though they were more senior and would have caught this. There's any number of process improvements that you can also make that have nothing to do with blame. And seeking out to improve process and not crucify people is a major shift that people need to make here in order to create a safe environment. Yes, people deserve to, reprisal for making a major mistake, but that's not you don't have to shame them into oblivion, right? That doesn't have to be. And the language I hear is, oh, wow, you made that one mistake and 8 months later, we're still talking about it in your performance review. And what's that about, right? So I'd say that. And then there's the other two, where there's, the unpreventable failure, the systematic failure. Like, let's say a hurricane hits and we weren't able to deliver our fruit. No, that's not your fault. But what we should be thinking about there is, how do we mitigate against that? So how do we have a hurricane policy, right? Like, what do we do in these instances and prepare better? And then there's sort of the final piece, which is the actual scientific mistakes, the trial and error mistakes. How do we encourage people to pursue, fail fast, and actually feel comfortable doing that? Because that's where all innovation comes from. And we need people to be doing that. So we can't choke it off by not being able to tell the difference between those three and punishing the wrong ones. Or even though you really shouldn't be punishing any of them at all, you should put them in context. But there's the second piece to that as well, which is just wanting to pursue growth. And this is another challenge for people. Sure, I can tell my manager, I really want to learn from you. I want more feedback and, affirming feedback that tells me the things that I'm doing right, and constructive feedback, the things that I need to change. That's great. We all know that, and that's part of the job. But what about coaching? We say we want people to do coaching, but when you ask somebody, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Do you accept the answer, not here? A lot of managers are not equipped for that, and you have to be. You have to provide an environment where you're not only going to allow them to have a dream, but you're going to help them have a dream. And it's that kind of practice, saying, you know what, I know this isn't part of your job, but let's take 5% of it and let you shadow this other department. Let's see whether you like it. That action alone, that doesn't have to happen. Most companies don't structurally require that. Really goes a long way to send a signal to employees. This is a place where you can grow, even if we don't necessarily see it in the direct place that you're in. And that is radical in many ways.
Yeah. I was in a meeting yesterday and someone gave me a quote. I think it's attributed to Richard Branson, which is, train people like you want them to leave, but treat them like you want them to stay. And I think, that for me, I've never worked anywhere that has successfully, kind of handcuff people to the organization by not developing them and trying to, because they will just they will either leave straight away or they will just find another way to develop themselves so they can leave, and no thanks to you, to the organization. So yeah, definitely it's definitely a
they're not
key.
Performing well. They're not even performing better. You can't expect them to perform better and not teach them how to do that. So they're either going to be growing or stagnating organizational impact. So got to make that decision somewhere.
Absolutely. So move on to the third one then, because I know this is an area you're really passionate about, Maurice, and I want to make sure we cover this. So the one that you said, I think in your when you just introduced these three areas, which is probably the one that often gets overlooked from a psychological safety perspective. So DEI and bringing my whole self to work. So just explain that a little bit more, please.
Absolutely. So I try and break that into two different areas that both have to do with the uniqueness of the individual. I think the sweet spot of what people really need in organizations is they want to have membership in a group or a team. That evolutionarily has been prioritized by our brains as making us more safe. I mean, back in the day, it was because we're safety in numbers against the lions and whatever else, right? But today, it's that social need is what we need emotionally and in other capacities. And so having membership in a group, but not being, a face in the crowd, but being valued. I see you and I value what you individually contribute is a real need that people have. Otherwise, they don't have autonomy. They don't have mastery over the work that they do. They just become faceless. And nobody wants that. And so I've sort of identified two areas with some sub areas there. But the first one I call is strengths. I think we understand strengths, right? Most people think about strengths if they've heard it from Gallup or, that Strengths Finder. It's what are the strengths that I contribute to the organization? Lencioni recently came with Working Geniuses. A lot of organizations have what are your strengths in an organization? Maybe it's specifically looking at the job description and saying, I'm great at these 4 bullets and I'm not great at these 2. Whatever it is, you can identify your strengths, because strengths, by definition, from a skill set perspective, is what do you do really well that also gives you energy, as opposed to something you do really well that you hate doing.
Yeah.
That's not a strength. It does not give you energy. It's not something you want to be doing. So that's one area. But then there's also character. There are actually 24 particular virtues or character traits that are inherent to people. And just like with skills, you can actually find which character traits, like it could be honesty, it could be courage, it could be thoughtfulness, whatever these are. There are 24 specific ones that are pretty much identified globally. And you can use that to determine, okay, what are your skill sets and what are your character traits? That's pretty unique to you and how you're going to approach the work and the experiences you have with people. To add to that, there's a third part that adds sort of that experiential piece, which is what I'll call your intersectional identity. And I referenced it earlier, but you can't tell me that if a person if we have 2 men, but one is straight and one is gay, one is Black and one is Latino, one is, what has a disability, the other one is a caregiver, that these aren't different experiences for those people. They don't add a nuance around them. And most importantly, when a woman walks in a room, when a person of color or a disadvantaged group walks in the room, and they don't see anyone who looks like them, you can't tell me they don't feel safe. They're not safe in that environment, and they're thinking about that at least a good enough percentage to distract. I mean, some research shows that until the room looks about 40% diverse is when people start feeling, safe to really be themselves. And that's a lot. But you can do that on a team. You may not be able to easily do that in a company. So something to think about there. How do you really identify these differences and value them and respect them in a way that people feel comfortable being vulnerable and open about who they are, as opposed to the old adage, there should be a boundary. I keep my friends at home and I keep my, colleagues at work. Are you kidding? I have tons of friends at work, right? I have people who I spend half of my life with. If they're not friends, what am I doing? Right? And we have to allow for that experience. Obviously not maybe be completely informal in those circumstances, but that doesn't mean we can't have real meaningful relationships with those people.
And that does that link in with the belonging element as well, or is that a separate piece?
A lot of organizations are defining belonging as sort of that diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, which really is that identity piece. I actually think belonging is almost synonymous to psychological safety in many ways. And the reason for that is because I don't think I belong if I don't have a voice, but people, for whatever reason, think that, I can talk all day long about being a Latino gay male, but they don't want to hear my actual thoughts around the workplace. I don't feel like I'm safe in that environment at all. I'm a token in that circumstance, right?
Yeah.
So belonging to me is your membership in the group is not in jeopardy or not in question. And because your contributions are valued, because your uniqueness is valued, and because you have that voice and growth pursuits. That's what I would call belonging.
Yeah. Excellent. So, thank you. That's a really good summary, and I like that. And I think we'll put that into the show notes. Those 3 different elements that you've just talked us through there, Maurice. I just want to move on because I'm just conscious of time. Yeah. To I guess it kind of embodies everything we've been talking about, which is and if it's not apparent now, then let's spell it out. What's the data tell us, or what does the evidence tell us that about the business case for creating an environment where people feel psychologically safe. So where they have a voice, where they feel that they can grow, that they feel as though they belong, and that their diversity, whatever diversity they represent, is welcomed, and that they see other people around them who are like them, and they feel part of that family in the organization. What is the business case, if it's not already obvious to people? But for those people who need to know the numbers, or need to know the kind of the real sort of metrics around it.
The data is extremely clear, and yet you'd be surprised how many people talk or mention psychological safety, and they sort of have that face as if they're, how the word woke has been misappropriated now. They basically look at me with that woke, this is just a woke word. This is a bougie word, $1 million consulting word, whatever else. And I'm like, no, this is a real experience with real data to back it. And if you remember, what we were sort of finding out at the sort of tail end of some of the private equity work that I was doing, we were uncovering 4 key metrics. And I believe very much that if you are trying to understand and quantify psychological safety, you first have to go to these 4 metrics, because they're the ones that I really think organizationally have the most impact. First is employee engagement or employee experience, and different organizations are at different levels there. But ultimately, engagement and experience is the degree to which you care about the organization and are motivated by the organization. And it very particularly unlocks discretionary effort, which means I am more likely to go above and beyond to finish this deliverable, or to work on, a couple hours on the weekend, or to make sure that this email is rewritten so that it's not garbage even though I only had 10 minutes, I took an extra 10 minutes to make sure that the client got what they really needed well and not created more problems. That discretionary effort happens only to engaged people, emotionally engaged people who are engaged at a sort of safety, belonging, heart level with the organization. And it shows. And what we see there is engagement in psychologically safe environments where people say they are safe, can increase by up to 76%. And when that happens, you're 76% more likely to unlock discretionary value. Even if that's 1 hour per employee, that could mean thousands of hours in quantifiable value that's been added. Second is performance and productivity, which is distinct from what I just said, in that this has actually been shown to increase by 56%. And because people who care about their environment are also care to improve the environment, and they care about improving the environment because they actually will learn new things and actually apply the training. Psychologically safe environment, and I was shocked by the data, are something like 30 to 40% more likely to apply training that they learned at their job. Now, I don't know what the rest of the people are doing in those trainings, but perhaps they're like, I'm too lazy to bother, or quite frankly, I'm overwhelmed and I just can't get there. Whereas these individuals are like, no, I need to do this because I want to make my products better. And they make that connection. And so 56% improvement in productivity and performance, that's a biggie. The one that's all the rage, not only in private equity, but I think in software, and honestly, in any company that's trying to survive in the long term with how things change so rapidly, is problem solving and innovation. If you are not coming up with better ideas, someone else is. And this psychologically safe environment, the research clearly shows that you can get up to 49% more innovation or more contributions, because that's really what it allows: more creative contributions, more creation, more voiced opinions, more strategic thinking in these areas from a wider range of employees in these groups, because they feel safe that they won't have reprisal, they won't be made fun of. Because remember, a lot of these aren't you're going to be fired. A lot of these are, I'll have a social impact. People will laugh at me. And that's enough to keep people from saying the $1 million idea. And this really helps you by about half. Also by half is the fourth one, which is retention.
Okay.
Because strangely enough, people who are truly engaged and motivated really have better performance and to contribute to more success at the organization stay longer. And
Yeah.
so it's up to 50% improvement in that area, or 50% less likely to leave if you look at it the other way. And I think that saves astronomical sums. I just captured this in an article recently where you can see all the data being punched, but just for the sake of listener, all of those metrics are real. They're based on something, they're based on logic, they're based on research. And I just can't believe that people would not be persuaded to at least take a look.
Yeah, I can't think of any organization that wouldn't want more discretionary effort, more productivity and performance, more problem solving and innovation and retention. So yeah, absolutely. And to be able to quantify that, I think is really, really important. And I think more importantly, the connection between, you know, what you've talked about, your definition of psychological safety and those metrics is, for me, is really clear. And you can see in an organization that doesn't have psychological safety, just intuitively how it will suppress or give you a, you know, particularly suppressing retention in double negative, but it's going to increase turnover, which is not what you want. So yeah, absolutely. So Maurice, just before we close out, you know, we've got an audience here of internal communicators, OD people who work in employee engagement, HR, learning and development, and I think all of what you've talked about today it will hopefully, well, I'm sure it will resonate with them. Just thinking about that audience, and it's still quite a broad audience. Anything else in terms of, you know, particularly maybe in terms of the communications aspects? What internal communications professionals and people who have a strong link into comms can do to, you know, not just communicate, because it's not the sort of thing you communicate. You got to walk the talk. But what how can they help their leaders, their organization, their culture to really embrace psychological safety?
I think people need to realize that all the work that they just put into emotional intelligence, you know, what people
Mm,
thought was the fad before psychological safety, has still meaning.
mm,
Psychological safety is just emotional intelligence 3.0, if you really
mm,
want to think about it. Because let me tell you, if you cannot self regulate and you start screaming at everybody, that is not a safe environment. Nobody is
yeah,
going to feel that that is safe, right? So it's really important that you are able to be self-aware, you are able to self-regulate and approach those practices. In particular, and I referenced him earlier, Daniel Coyle does a lot of work in this space around the interpersonal communication pieces. He focuses one on belonging cues. When you have a conversation with one other person, there are three elements that must sustain, three elements that you have to be watchful for in order to create a safe environment. That first is that there is energy in the exchange. Like you and I are talking back and forth. It's not like you're talking and then I'm, looking over here. There's a pause for 5 hours, and then maybe I come back and look at you because I'm working on something else. No, there's energy. There's back and forth. Second, that there's individualization. I'm not just giving you generic garbage, that can be applied to any person. It could, apply to Yeltsin or Putin or something like that.
mm,
No,
mm,
it applies to you. Things like, oh, yes, I remember from our conversation last week, or, you've been struggling with this a lot, right?
mm, mm,
Those sorts of things individualize it. And then third, and I think we all mess this up, we get really busy and we do not signal that we want the conversation to sustain after it ends. Instead, we end it and we go, "Oh shoot, I have to go right now. I'm sorry, I'm late. Bye." And then it's
yeah.
like this feeling of like, did I do something wrong? Do I smell? What's going on here? And it actually lets doubt enter. That's just the way human beings are. Even confident people, even if I
Yeah.
spend a couple of seconds on it, it's like, what just happened here? Um, and Coyle says these three belonging cues are essential for interpersonal communication and essential for safety.
Yeah.
So that's definitely one. Um, the second I really think is, and you hear this a lot in DEI, but not really outside of that, is the concept of microaggressions and microaffirmations. Microaggressions are, I said earlier, people yell at each other. Well, no, not necessarily. What usually happens is people will just interrupt you. you'll say something and they'll ignore everything that you just said and then say something else and just sort of cut off the conversation. They'll stop you and just be like, okay, I think we've heard enough of that, or I just can't understand what you're saying. Things like that. These are all microaggressions. Some of them border on being aggressions, but they are what's referred to as microaggressions, and they absolutely destroy psychological safety. Versus the other side is microaffirmations. It's saying things like, I haven't heard from, John yet. I haven't heard from Joan yet. I'd like to hear from you because I think you have a lot to say. Or I really appreciated when you said that. Or wait, hold on. Please don't interrupt her. I really want to hear what she has to say. These are microaffirmations. These are the type of statements made strategically in group communications that can really add tremendous value to that safety experience because it shows that you respect people, even when someone else has engaged in microaggressions. It shows that when it mattered, you stood up for them. And that at the end is a major component. I could go on forever, but those are two that I would definitely.
That's excellent. No, well, thank you, Maurice. So look, that's been absolutely fantastic. Let's just finish off by just saying how people can get in touch with you. So I've got your LinkedIn profile. You sent me another couple of links. Do you want to just tell me what are the links that we've got there, and then I'll signpost them in the show notes. If anyone is looking at this on our website, you'll find the show notes attached to this episode on engagingic.com. But what are the other two or three things that you've sent through, Maurice, please?
I sent three more things. One is just the DuCoin Human Capital, where a lot of my firm does the work on LinkedIn. So just that link so that people can find DuCoin Human Capital. But you can also go to my actual website, ducoinhcm.com. That actually has a lot of the work that I'm referencing right now, at least in terms of the language. And that's where people can really go to engage with me as well. To see, okay, what are the opportunities here? How can I work? And it doesn't have to be big projects either. It could just be a conversation and see where that goes. But my website is also a good place. It actually just relaunched today. So that's really great timing. And it had nothing to do with anything, but just that's where we land. Coincidence is coincidence, maybe. And then the last one is just an article. As the article I alluded to before on psychological safety and the ROI. If people are interested in really crunching the numbers, they can go and see that there. And it's a long article because I had to crunch the numbers. Logic is there. And, I just think transparency is key here.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. And thank you for your generosity there. It's great to, as you know, anyone who listens to podcasts, it's always frustrating because you kind of hear it and you think, where did I pick that up from? Or you're trying to remember something when you're at the gym or in the car and being able to go back to it. So yeah, if you're listening and you want to go back to some of that data that Maurice mentioned, have a look on engagingic.com and look at the links at the bottom there, and you'll find that. So you can go to that and you can actually get that data and have a look at it for yourself. So look, Maurice, that's been absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. That's really, really great construct around the conversation there. I appreciate you. I know we had our conversation a few weeks ago when we talked about what we were going to talk about, but you've really coherently put that across because I think it's an area, as I say, that lots of people are talking about, but I get a sense that not everybody fully understands or gets it, and I think you've really, really kind of given us a really nice and a simple but very, very in-depth way of thinking about psychological safety and how we can practically use it in our organizations. So thank you so much.
Awesome. That's wonderful. Thank you for having me. As you can see, I'm pretty passionate about this subject, maybe to a fault, but I appreciate the thoughtful questions that led us to really be able to talk about what I think will help people. So
wonderful.
I'm excited.
Thank you, Maurice. Take care, and all the best with your new website. Your relaunch website. I'll be having a look at that, and I'm sure our listeners will as well. So you take care, and wishing you all the best for the rest of this year.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. If you've got any ideas for episodes you'd like us to cover in future, you can email us at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk, or you can use the feedback form at engagingic.com. If you're not already subscribed to the show via your podcast platform, please do so. And if you could leave a review for us, that would be absolutely fantastic. We have links to other episodes at engagingic.com. All of our previous episodes are available there. And if you're interested in our visual communication services, our big pictures, our learning maps, our explainer videos, and also our live graphic recording, please get in touch with us again at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk. Thank you.